I have not yet begun to fight. The father of the US Navy was a Scotsman? You bet your neeps and tatties he was. Okay, that's not actually as strange as it sounds. If you know what neeps and tatties are. Anyways. Powerful words from a larger-than-life personality who had no idea that 120 years after his passing, the country he fought so hard for would work hard to fight for his proper burial. Dramatic life and a dramatic ending, which, as we talk about, is often the case. He was sometimes called a pirate. Others swore that he was a privateer, an adventurer. He could be brash. He could be gutsy. We're talking John Paul Jones, the father of the United States Navy. Now, he lived in Portsmouth for about 18 months when you put all the time together, and the reason that I'm here on Fortree Island looking over at Seavey Island right there is because this, well, it would have looked very different in the 18th century, but this is where ships were being built, and that's part of the reason he was here. Well, he was waiting for his ships to be completed by the newly formed United States Navy. Lived in a house in town just behind us. We're going to go tour, talk about that. But I thought I would start here at the source of his adventure. Now, John Paul Jones loved Portsmouth, and he said that the happiest times of his life were when he was here in Portsmouth and when he was in Paris, France. Paris, France would end up being where he would see the end of his days, and we'll talk about that and that dramatic sequence of events in a little while. But look at this place. It's easy to see why he loved it so much. And again, we are on Fortree Island. This is off of Pierce Island. Lots of little islands all throughout this area, but I thought it was really appropriate to show you the Navy Yard, which is still the Navy Yard. We can't go on it because, well, I don't have military ID. But you can see it's still a hub of activity for the United States Navy. They employ a lot of people, military and civilian, and it's a huge part of the community here. It was a huge part of the community in the 1700s when John Paul Jones was hanging out. John Paul Jones. He was tough, he was brash, funny, sometimes difficult to work with, but he was always brave and known for being bold. He was born John Paul and later added the Jones because he thought it added a certain bit of flair to his name and a little bit of drama, which kind of perfectly sums up his personality as well. Now, if you have Scotland, he was from the southwest coast in Galloway, Kilcroubry to be very specific. And don't think that just because someone is from the south of Scotland, it makes them any less of a Scotsman. They will definitely tell you otherwise. And though he wasn't far from the English borders and had a lot of experience, as we'll talk about, sailing the seas around England, much to the demise of the English, he was Scottish through and through. His cottage is still there, and you can go and tour it. It's open all year round, most days of the week. So if any of you guys go to Scotland, definitely check it out. I'm hoping to be able to take you guys there soon to show you and do a update on this video and bring it full circle. I miss Scotland every day that I'm out there and definitely hope that we can do that soon. Once groceries stop being $100 a bag, that would really help things out. Less about me, more about John Paul Jones. You know, he was friends with all the right people, and people were impressed by him just naturally. That's how he came across. When he got here, he became involved with Freemasonry, which gained him more friends, as was often the case, and kind of the purpose early on. He became friends with a lot of key figures in what we now know as founding fathers. He had to be tough because he started sailing at the tender age of 13, which I can't imagine my boys sailing at the age of 13. That is a rough life. As part of what would become quite an illustrious sailing career, he ends up sailing all over the world. And for a short time, part of that sailing was involved with the slave trade, but he quickly realized that it was a terrible enterprise. He called it absolutely disgusting and made a decision right there and then to never, ever be involved with the trade of people ever again. He became captain of a Scottish ship after its original captain died of yellow fever. Sucks to be him. And this ended up becoming a huge turning point in his career. He was able to show that he had skill. This led to him taking over a ship and going on an adventure to the West Indies. You know, John Paul Jones was not without controversy. I told you he could be bombastic and brash at times. He could also be a very hard captain to have to work for. At one time, he flogged one of his crew members so hard that the young boy actually passed away from his injuries, which is really gruesome and hard to think of. Turns out he was a Scottish nobleman, unbeknownst to John Paul Jones, and his family did have him court-martialed. He was able to get out of it, but it kind of stuck with him, that negative story, you know, throughout his career. He was also, unfortunately, a known womanizer. He never married. Let's just say he did get around, unfortunately, and was also accused of some things. Later on in his career, he will go on to serve in the Russian Navy, but he didn't end up getting along with the Russians very well. Surprise, surprise, right? And there was a young woman there that he was accused of having relations with. He apparently didn't know how old she was. It reads kind of like an episode of Chris Hansen, unfortunately, but he did fight it, and they said that there was really no proof and that it was mutual. I hope that that's true. Just giving you guys all the facts. I can't tell you that he was like this totally upright moral man his whole life. He was human, he had his faults, but he was still very important and interesting. I don't know what that loud noise is, something coming from the Navy Yard. To the formation of our Navy and to United States history. And he was a badass, regardless. In 1774, he comes to America and he lands first in Philadelphia. Decides he wants to be an American and becomes first lieutenant on a new ship on the newly formed U.S. Navy. And in knowing the right people and being involved in Freemasonry, like I said before, and just being impressive. If you read documents from the founders and people who knew him in this time, over and over again, you'll see that he just had a natural ability to lead. He impressed people and definitely left an impression. Another really cool, crazy thing. In 1776, he would go on to take command of the ship Ranger, which we'll be talking more about. And the Ranger is notable because it becomes the first American ship to be acknowledged as an American ship and saluted by the French Navy, which John Paul Jones thought was a huge honor. And he was a patriot in every sense of the word, despite everything else, despite his larger-than-life personality, despite some of his quirks and womanizing. Oh, John Paul, you're killing me, man. Still, a patriot through and through. And again, you know, it took right people, the right time. And as we go through the Revolutionary War and we learn about the formation of this country, you'll see that it took all types. 1777, he comes here to Portsmouth, a place that he loved, like I said. Now, he might have loved Portsmouth, but he absolutely hated the Wentworths. John Wentworth, Benning Wentworth's father. I hope you guys watched my most recent video about Benning Wentworth and his home just down the road here. Yeah, John Paul Jones could not stand them and actually drove John Wentworth out of town and kicked him out of his house, which is pretty legendary. He also did not like the new Governor John Langdon, and they clashed a lot, especially while his ships were being built, and he was right here while they were being built, right over there. So he was in town and the Raleigh and the Ranger were being built, and that's what he was waiting for. And that is going to bring us to the next part of the story. And I'm going to move the car. We're going to go to the other side of town and continue this very interesting tale of John Paul Jones in Portsmouth. Okay, just kidding. We're going to take a pause and going into town for just a second because it's so pretty out. I took you a little further down the road so that you could see more of Pierce Island, and we can look at the water while we discuss the adventures of the amazing John Paul Jones. So the Ranger is being built right here, actually right over there. And in 1778, he takes the Ranger out again over to England, and he attacks Whitehaven in an epic battle. And this was an area he was very familiar with because he had been sailing those seas since he was a 13-year-old boy. Later, he returns here to Portsmouth, resumes his life of partying, his clashing with Governor John Langdon. They're fighting, and he waits for his next ship to be built. And as we step down here, you've got to think he probably spent some time on this same beach. So he comes back to Portsmouth for a second time, and he's waiting for his ship called the America to be built. And he's waiting, and he's clashing with Langdon, and he tells Langdon that he doesn't like the way the ship is being built, and Langdon's telling him that he's an expert, and John Paul Jones is saying he's an expert, and those two are just not getting along. And it really sucks. After all of that and him coming back here, though he enjoyed it, like I said, he just got right back into his life. The ship is finally done, and it's given to the French. Wah wah. So poor John Paul Jones, the decision is made, oh, the French need it, they're helping us, we're getting deeper into this conflict, and they've signed on, and you know, as a show of goodwill, we're supplying them with things, including a ship quite literally called the America. And as John Paul Jones predicted, it was not built correctly, and the darn thing collapsed. It didn't work for the French, so if there is such thing as retribution with a ship, she gave it, and I'm sure that John Paul Jones probably had himself a little laugh over that one. His adventures as an American U.S. Navyman would continue, and he would go on even to sail back to Ireland, England, and Scotland several times on our behalf, which is crazy. You have to wonder how that made him feel, him going back to those waters that he knew so well. Did he say those famous words, "I have not yet begun to fight"? Well, that's an interesting story. In 1779, he fought against a British warship during the Battle of Flamborough Head, actually. And that was his response when they told him to surrender. And those words became a famous symbol of resilience and strength. It was an American victory, and the ship was sunk the following day. But that brings us back to the need to finally see. I'm procrastinating because it's so beautiful. I'm really enjoying this. I don't know if you guys can tell. Is it obvious? Yeah, I'm digging this. He never permanently lived here, as I said. It equaled out to about 18 months altogether. But the home we're going to visit is forever known as the John Paul Jones house. And a lot of that is just due to the fact that, you know, he's their most famous resident, and he was a tenant. He rented rooms there. A lot of people did, but it's John Paul Jones, Mr. I have not begun to fight. Mr. I told you so. What are you doing with this ship, you buffoon? And Mr. I'm going to fight these waters that I know so well, even though it's close to home. And I'm going to do this with a conviction because I believe in liberty so much. And I have fully taken on the heartbeat of this new country that I am loving so much. And he's so incredible. And I think that his story captivates me. He used to not be like my favorite, you know, and it's easy to think, oh gosh, he was kind of, you know, and like a nasty sailor dude. And he was kind of crude, and what's with the womanizing? But the more that I have really studied him and looked at him throughout my life, the more I appreciate John Paul Jones. And I just think that, you know, where would we be without him? And again, it really does take all types. And who of us is perfect, right? I'm not. Nobody really is. But it's what you do with what you've got. And that is so often the American story. How many times have I said this to you guys now? I think quite a few. But we're gonna head over to town now, take a look at the house he lived in that he loved so much, and learn more of the story. They've got some cool stuff on display there too, so we're gonna check it out. Here we go. Originally built by Gregory Purcell in 1758. It was a boarding house, and of course, the most famous boarder of them all, John Paul Jones, lived here off and on, accumulating up to 18 months of his life. But an important part of the story of John Paul Jones and the formation of the US Navy, his adventures here, and the forming of this nation. And here you go. They are open Thursday to Monday, 10 to 4. All right, guys, here we go. We are in, and you kind of are greeted by a docent. She gave us a little bit of an introduction and then said, just go ahead and wander the house. So here we go. They've got period furnishings inside. This definitely was different from how John Paul Jones grew up, being that he was from a tiny white cottage, or bothy as they say, you know, on the Scottish coast, on the southwest coast of Scotland, and grew up very poor. And he came here and took up space in this home. It must have felt quite grand to him. And here's some signage reiterating the importance of Portsmouth in the Revolution. If you guys watched my raid on Fort William and Mary video, you will know what this is talking about. By 1776, a number of Portsmouth men playing important roles on the nation level in the revolutionary government. Among them were William Whipple, who signed the Declaration of Independence, and John Langdon, who became agent of prizes. Langdon was instrumental in creating the new Continental Navy and building its first 3 ships, the Raleigh, the Ranger, and the America, much to the chagrin of John Paul Jones, as I told you guys. And here we have our fearless leader, His Excellency George Washington, on the wall, as any good patriot would have on their walls at the time. Duh. Just looking at the table setting here, I recognize this pattern as the pattern of the Society of the Cincinnati. And I don't see any other pieces with it, but that one I definitely recognize that as that. Time could definitely spent looking at all of the articles and the art and all of the incredible furniture and stuff in here. It's really cool. Funny full circle moment here. It says George III, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France, Ireland, King Defender of the Faith. John Wentworth, Esquire, our Captain General Governor and Commander-in-Chief, the Province of New Hampshire. Of course, that's Benning Wentworth's father. John Paul Jones could not stand these guys, and it's also funny because, as I said, John Paul Jones would go on to fight in naval battles in the mentioned countries on behalf of the United States, new military, and the US Navy. And I love the wallpaper in here. And here you go. Here is a copy of Howden's life mask and bust made. Howden famously also made the incredible George Washington statue that is in Richmond in the Virginia State House, and said to be the most lifelike likenesses of the Founding Fathers. Howden was an incredible sculptor, a Frenchman, and friend to patriots. Again, I love the wallpaper. I love the creaky floors and everything in here. Some beautiful scrimshaw there. And unique pieces from naval history. This cool room, which I suspect they're keeping dark to protect the beautiful cross-stitch, holds just that, embroidery and cross-stitch. And cross-stitch, if you guys didn't know, was a wonderful way to teach kids to read and to learn and memorize Bible verses. So you could spend hours around the fire at night cross-stitching. It's pretty relaxing. This is really nerdy, but I know how to cross-stitch and I used to really enjoy it. Haven't done it for a while. It takes a lot of time, it's a lot of work, but it's really fulfilling when you finish a project. None of mine are as detailed or as beautiful as these, but I am not bad at it, I must say. And back in the day, it was a very popular thing for girls and ladies to do and sit around and kind of have like sewing circles. And it was also useful, as I say, as sort of part of education. Now, John Paul Jones passes away at the age of 45, and it's thought that it may have been kidney failure as a contributing factor, but we also know that he did have pneumonia. Some solace could be found in the strange fact that when his body was found in his apartment in Paris, he was found in a kneeling position as if he was praying, which I think is very interesting. You know, they say no sinners in a foxhole. You never know. But he did have a good Scottish Presbyterian upbringing as a child, And you just think that in his last days, he was probably thinking about that. Here is the copy of the famous Howden life mask bust. I must say, John Paul Jones, handsome dude. You know, the ladies, they liked him. It's kind of amazing to think of all this. I'm just soaking it all in here, almost without words. So yeah, he passed away in his apartment while he was living in Paris, France, and he was buried in a mass grave, a Protestant one, which was unusual, and inside of a lead coffin, but nobody knew exactly where, and because there was so much upheaval going on in France at the time, people were really worried about, you know, everything just continuing to kind of compile, and the cemetery is quite literally being forgotten one day and kind of going away. So there was finally an effort to be made, and after a ton of time and money spent on searching for Jones's body, his coffin, which again was lead, and that was very rare and expensive for the time, and it was beautiful. They finally found it, they exhumed it, they measured his corpse that revealed that he was 5'7", the exact height of John Paul Jones, our beloved admiral, and in the week that followed, dozens of doctors, students, anthropologists studied his body to determine with exact accuracy that this was in fact the body of John Paul Jones. And when they took him out and looked at him, they found a linen cap on his head with a beautiful J embroidered on it, and they also compared it to the life mask done by Howden, and they said that yes, it was definitely him. This was a huge event, and they took a picture of it. Now, this is gruesome, and I'm warning you guys, if you don't like this kind of stuff, look away. I'm going to insert a picture, so parental advisory, or if you're squeamish, don't like stuff like this, just watch out. But here's a picture of the condition they found John Paul Jones's body in. So that is what it looked like, and the reason that it was so well preserved 120 years after the fact is because they had poured alcohol into the lead coffin, preserving it in kind of its own unique mummification process. Combined with the soil, it just preserved that way, which is unusual, but him having a lead coffin to begin with was unusual. So, you know, I think it's absolutely fascinating, though a bit gruesome. Now, he was quickly given a new casket, and they draped an American flag faster over that thing than you could whistle Dixie, as they say, and they were like, okay, now what's the plan? What are we gonna do? They prepared to move it over land and sea to his final resting place in Annapolis, Maryland, at the Naval Academy, and this was thanks mostly to Theodore Roosevelt, who was a big fan of the United States Navy, a big fan of the Founding Fathers, was a historian in his own right, loved John Paul Jones, and wanted to make sure that he got the respect due. And in a fortuitous twist of fate, this room talks about the peace treaty that was signed right here in Portsmouth. And we have this man, Theodore Roosevelt, to thank mostly for retrieving John Paul Jones' body and giving it a proper place in Annapolis at the Naval Academy, where it sits in a beautiful sarcophagus to this day. Of course, in true Theodore Roosevelt style, festivities and acknowledgement, beautiful speeches. And we'll have to come back another time to really delve into the Portsmouth Peace Treaty. I do have a video on it. I will put a link in the description below. This is kind of a whole other thing. Today we really wanted to focus on John Paul Jones, but as you see, there's a lot that you could look at in this very cool house museum. Now that is pretty funny. What do you guys think about the father of the Navy just being buried in a mass grave in Paris and nobody really knowing where he is for over 120 years? That's crazy, right? I mean, it happens. Like when we went to Savannah, we saw some drama with graves there. Casimir Pulaski too, among others. So sometimes bodies get lost. It's strange. And I think that the way in which his body was treated and then identified and then reinterred was really strange. But thanks to one of my favorite fellow historians, Theodore Roosevelt, dignity was restored and he got the end of the story that he deserved. Now sits in the beautiful Naval Academy in Annapolis, which I have been really wanting to go back and visit. It's been a long time, and it seems like I keep talking about it with you guys. If you remember, that's also where the State House is. That does in fact definitely have an original Franklin lightning rod above it. So that's something we might have to check out on a road trip, hopefully in the near future. And now you guys know why at the beginning I said, he famously said, "I have not yet begun to fight," and we had to fight for the proper restoration of the shell of John Paul Jones. So, kind of like Paul Harvey, that's the rest of the story. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope I didn't leave anything out. I probably did. Sometimes I get talking to you guys and I get so excited about this stuff and our revolutionary heroes that I later on go, oh my gosh, I forgot this, that, or the other thing. Good thing there's always more. I can always put out more content. But I hope you guys enjoyed that. I really had fun today. It is so nice out. I think I'm going to stand here and just procrastinate a little bit longer while the breeze is blowing around. I'm always telling you guys how great Portsmouth architecture is, but check out this creepy place. Doesn't that give like creepy Victorian Gothic vibes? Ooh, kind of spoopy. I'm that history chick, and like Patrick Henry, I know of no way of judging the future, but by the past. The past is alive, it's real, it's waiting to be explored right here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire at the John Paul Jones House and beyond. Hope that you guys enjoyed learning about the father of the U.S. Navy, his interesting adventures, his life, and his time here in beautiful Portsmouth on the New Hampshire seacoast. We will see you soon. It's going to be an awesome weekend. We have so much ahead. Remember, I am also on Instagram at @that_historychick, on Facebook at @thathistorychick, and right here on YouTube at @thathistorychick with more exciting content from the 18th century and beyond. We will see you very soon. Take care. Bye.